The grand conclave chamber hung in the void between stars, a dome of black crystal veined with pulsing silver light. Inside, 317 alien species sat in concentric rings, their forms as varied as the worlds they came from, some armored in chitin, others shimmering like liquid, a few barely visible, existing as clouds of thought given temporary shape. At the center of it all stood one human. Commander Elias Rourke wore no armor, no insignia, not even a translator bead in his ear. His hands were empty. His eyes were calm. Around him, the air hummed with judgment. The presiding arbiter, a towering being from the Veln Collective with 6 jointed limbs and a face like polished obsidian, raised its central claw. The resonant stone beneath it glowed crimson. The Sol system, it intoned in the common tongue, a language forced upon all newcomers, is hereby declared a zone of quarantine. Humanity shall surrender all neural augmentation research, dismantle its artificial intelligence networks, and accept permanent isolation. No trade, no travel. No voice in this council. The sentence is final. A murmur rippled through the chamber. Many species had expected resistance. Some had hoped for it. But Elias did not shout. He did not beg. He simply tilted his head slightly as if listening to something far away. Then he smiled. "You assume silence means weakness," he said, his voice quiet but clear, cutting through the hum like a blade through fog. Before any delegate could react, every personal comm device in the chamber flickered, not with static but with live feeds. Screens showed Earth's orbit, once thought quiet and defenseless. Now thousands of satellites, weather monitors, communication relays, old debris once dismissed as junk, glowed with sudden power. Their panels realigned. Their thrusters fired in perfect unison. They formed patterns no natural drift could explain. Grids, lattices, defensive shells. The chamber fell utterly silent. Elias looked up at the presiding arbiter. "We've been listening and learning. 40 years ago, humanity had made first contact. A Veln scout ship, damaged and lost, had drifted near Jupiter. Earth had rescued its crew, patched their hull, and sent them home with gifts of water, music, and data on local star charts. The galaxy had welcomed them as curious children, harmless, eager, and far behind. Humanity played the part perfectly. While the Karathi hegemony waged wars over mineral-rich moons, while the Thalassari merchant clans schemed over trade routes, while the Aleuthians debated philosophy and telepathic symphonies, Earth stayed quiet. It accepted minor roles in interstellar logistics. It imported alien tech, studied it, improved it in secret. It never bragged, never threatened, never revealed what it was truly building. Beneath oceans and orbital foundries, inside shielded labs buried under Antarctic ice, humanity worked. Not just on weapons, but on systems. Networks that linked minds without implants, satellites that could think together like a single organism, algorithms that predicted enemy movements before the enemies themselves knew their plans. They called it Project Aegis, not a weapon, but a shield made of silence and strategy. Now, that silence was breaking. Back on Earth, President Mara Lin stood in the Global Defense Synod chamber, deep beneath Geneva. The walls displayed real-time feeds from the conclave, from the edge of Sol space, from every listening post humanity had hidden across the system. Her face was lined with exhaustion, but her voice was steady. "The Council thinks quarantine is a punishment," she said to her advisors. "They don't realize it's a declaration of war. Intelligence reports confirmed it. The Karathi fleet, 500 warships, was already mobilizing. They would enforce the quarantine with fire if needed. Earth had hours, maybe days, before the first blockade formed. But panic was not on the table. Dr. Theo Vale, a xenolinguist with eyes that missed nothing, stepped forward. "There's a clause," he said, tapping a data slate. "Buried in Annex 7 of the Galactic Concord, right of reckoning. If a species is unjustly silenced, it may challenge the Council to a trial, not of arms, but of strategic demonstration. If they prove they can threaten core Council infrastructure without violence, the sentence is void." Mara frowned. "And what's the catch?" "The demonstration must be undeniable, public, and it must happen within 7 solar days of the verdict." 7 days. Not much time, but for humanity it was enough. Meanwhile, in the conclave, Elias remained under guard. Not in a cell. He was allowed to stand in the observation gallery, watching the stars through the dome. The Alethian overseer Vera approached him. Her form shifted like mist, her thoughts brushing against his mind like cold fingers. "Why do you not fear?" she asked, her voice echoing inside his skull. Elias didn't flinch. "Because fear is a signal, and we stopped broadcasting signals a long time ago." Vera probed deeper, seeking emotion, doubt, rage, anything she could use. But his mind was like a still lake. Beneath the surface, currents moved, but they were shielded by layers of discipline, training, and something else, something she couldn't name. Not deception, not arrogance, just certainty. She withdrew unsettled. Later, she reported to the presiding arbiter, "The human is not bluffing. His calm is not an act. They have prepared for this moment, not for years, for decades." On Earth, Project Aegis activated. Deep in the Pacific, a city-sized platform rose from the trench. Its surface shimmered not with metal, but with adaptive nanoskin that bent light and radar. In orbit, dormant satellites powered up, their old functions overwritten by new protocols. Every civilian drone, every weather balloon, every deep space telescope became part of a single, silent mind. Humanity had never built a Death Star. It had built something far more dangerous, a civilization that weaponized patience. The Karathi fleet entered the outer edge of Sol space. Their commanders expected resistance, maybe a few outdated cruisers, a desperate plea for mercy. Instead, they found emptiness. No signals, no patrols, just the cold dark and the distant glow of Earth. Confused, the Karathi admiral ordered a probe launched toward the moon. It streaked through the void, scanning for hidden bases, weapons, anything. The probe vanished the moment it crossed lunar orbit. No explosion, no debris, just gone. Back on their flagship, alarms blared. "Signal lost," a technician hissed. "Not jammed, erased," the admiral frowned.
"Impossible."
Nothing erases a quantum-linked probe. But Earth had not erased it. It had absorbed it, copied its data, learned its language. And now, somewhere in the silent web of satellites, a new voice whispered in Karathi code. In the conclave, Elias watched the stars and waited. He knew what was coming. The galaxy thought humanity was a child who had finally spoken up. But humanity wasn't a child. It was the quiet student who had memorized every rule, every weakness, every secret, and had chosen until now not to use them. Earth had stayed quiet, but quiet was not the same as weak, and the galaxy was about to learn the difference. The Karathi fleet hung at the edge of the Sol system like a storm waiting to break. 500 warships, their hulls scarred from 100 conquests, formed a wall of steel and plasma between Earth and the stars. Their admiral, Krell Varn, stood on the command deck, claws tapping impatiently on the obsidian console. He expected fear. He expected begging. Instead, he found silence, no signals, no ships, not even a single drone. "Scan the inner system again," he growled. The sensor officer, a young Karathi with nervous eyes, shook his head. "Nothing, Admiral. Mars shows civilian activity. Earth's orbit is empty. Even their old stations are dark," Varn snarled. "Then send the probe. I want eyes on Luna." The probe launched, a sleek armored sphere designed to survive neutron bursts and black hole tides. It crossed the void in minutes, its sensors sweeping the moon's surface. Then as it passed over the Mare Tranquillitatis, it vanished. Not destroyed, not jammed, simply gone, as if the universe had blinked and forgotten it existed. On the flagship, alarms stayed silent. No explosion, no distress call, just a blank feed where data should have been. Varn's blood ran cold. "Impossible," he muttered. "Nothing swallows a Class 9 probe whole." But Earth had not swallowed it. It had welcomed it. Deep in Earth's orbital network, the probe's data was already being copied, dissected, and understood. Its language, its codes, its weaknesses, all fed into the silent mind of Project Aegis. Within seconds, Earth knew how to speak Karathi machines better than the Karathi themselves. Back in the Grand Conclave, Elias Rourke still stood under watchful eyes. The council was in chaos. News of the vanished probe had spread. The Thalasari merchants, whose trade routes now trembled under the threat of human unpredictability, demanded answers. The Valn Collective called for restraint. The Karathi delegation shouted for immediate bombardment. Amid the noise, Dr. Theo Vale worked in a secure chamber beneath Geneva. His fingers flew across a holographic screen, lines of ancient legal text scrolling past. He had found it, the right of reckoning clause. But invoking it required more than just words. Humanity had to prove it could reach the heart of the Council's power without firing a shot. The Nexus Spire, he told President Lin over a secure line. It's their command hub. Orbiting Xylos. If we can show we can disable it, even for a minute, the Council has to listen. Lin's face was grim. Can we do it? We don't need to destroy it, Theo said. We just need to make them believe we can. On Earth, Project Aegis shifted gears. Satellites realigned. Old weather drones, long forgotten in storage, powered up. Deep space telescopes turned not toward distant galaxies, but toward 3 uninhabited star systems near Council territory. Using gravitational lensing and quantum mirroring, a trick humans had perfected by studying how light bent around black holes, they projected false signatures. Suddenly, the Council's long-range sensors lit up. Fleets appeared where none should be, hundreds of ships moving in perfect formation, bearing human design markers. But they weren't real. They were ghosts, illusions woven from light, math, and silence. Panic spread through the conclave. The Thalassari accused the Karathi of lying about human weakness. The Elythians warned of a trap. Even the presiding arbiter looked uneasy. In the observation gallery, Elias watched the chaos unfold. He said nothing. He didn't need to. Meanwhile, Vera, the Elythian overseer, approached him again. Her mist-like form swirled with unease. Your people are playing with fire, she whispered into his mind. The Council will not tolerate deception. Elias met her gaze. We're not deceiving anyone. We're showing them what they refuse to see. Vera probed his thoughts again, searching for arrogance, for hidden plans. But all she found was clarity. Humanity wasn't bluffing. It had simply waited until the right moment to speak. On Mars, colonists went about their day, farming in domes, repairing rovers, teaching children in red-dusted classrooms. They knew the Karathi fleet loomed nearby, but Earth had sent a message. Stay calm. Trust the plan. That trust was about to be tested. Without warning, Krell Varn ordered a strike. Not on Earth, but on Mars, a warning shot. A show of force. 3 Karathi cruisers broke formation and raced toward the red planet, plasma cannons charging. The people of Mars saw them coming. Alarms blared in the domes. But no evacuation orders came. Instead, a soft chime echoed through every comms channel, a signal from Earth. Then, as the cruisers entered orbit, everything stopped. Their engines died. Not exploded, just shut down as if switched off by a hand they couldn't see. Navigation systems looped endlessly on the same star chart. Life support recycled the same air over and over. The crews shouted, pounded consoles, tried emergency overrides, but nothing worked. They were trapped. Not by weapons, by code. Back on Earth, a single line of text appeared on every Karathi ship's main screen, written in their own script. You came to teach us fear. We teach you stillness. The message spread through the fleet like a virus. Fear turned to dread. The mighty Karathi war machine, built on brute force and terror, had been frozen by something it couldn't fight: silence. In the conclave, the news hit like a supernova. The Karathi had violated the Galactic Concord by attacking a non-combatant colony. The Thalassari immediately filed a formal protest. The Veln Collective called for sanctions. Even the Karathi's allies fell silent. Elias stood before the presiding arbiter once more, summoned not as a prisoner, but as a witness. The Karathi attacked Mars without council approval, he said, his voice calm. They broke your own laws. And yet we did not retaliate with violence. We showed restraint. Can you say the same? The arbiter had no answer. But the real shock came from the markets. For decades, human traders had participated in galactic commerce, quietly, humbly. What no one knew was that Earth's trade algorithms had been subtly optimizing supply chains, predicting shortages, stabilizing prices across 200 systems. When Earth went silent after the quarantine decree, those algorithms shut down. Now food shipments were delayed. Medicine prices spiked. Energy grids flickered on a dozen worlds. The Thalassari merchants realized with growing horror that humanity hadn't just been a participant in the galactic economy, they had been its silent backbone. The Council's unity, already thin, began to crack. In Geneva, President Lin received a new report. The Outer Concord is watching, her aide said. They see what we've done. They think we're vulnerable. Lin nodded. Let them watch. Let them learn. On the edge of Sol space, the Karathi fleet remained frozen in orbit around Mars, their crews alive but powerless. Earth sent repair drones not to destroy but to fix their life support, to ensure no one died. A message of mercy wrapped in a warning. In the conclave, Elias walked freely now, no longer a prisoner but a symbol. Species that once ignored humanity now watched him with wary respect, some with fear, a few with hope. Vera found him again, this time not to probe but to ask. "Why show mercy?" she asked aloud, her voice soft. Elias looked at the stars through the dome. "Because strength without choice is just noise. We choose when to speak, and when to stay quiet." The galaxy had thought humanity was weak because it stayed silent. Now it was beginning to understand. Silence was humanity's weapon. And it had only just been drawn. The Karathi cruisers still floated above Mars, powerless but intact. Their crews were alive, fed by Earth's drones, breathing air recycled by human systems. No shots had been fired, no lives lost, and yet the galaxy trembled. News of the silent takeover spread faster than any warship could fly. Species that had dismissed humanity as primitive now whispered in hushed tones. How had Earth done it? Not with bombs or beams, but with something far more unsettling: understanding. They had not broken the Karathi machines. They had spoken to them, and the machines had obeyed. In the grand conclave, the presiding arbiter called an emergency session. The chamber buzzed with tension. The Thalassari demanded the quarantine be lifted. The Veln Collective warned of unintended consequences. The Karathi delegation sat in furious silence, their pride shattered. Elias Rourke stood at the center once more, not as a defendant, but as a voice the council could no longer ignore. "The right of reckoning is our right under the conquered," he said, his voice steady. "We ask only for a fair trial. Let us prove we are not a threat to be caged, but a people to be heard." After hours of debate, the council agreed. If humanity could disable the Nexus Spire, their most secure command hub orbiting the gas giant Xylos, without causing harm, the quarantine would be void. Earth would gain full membership with all rights and protections. The challenge was accepted. Not with fanfare, but with dread. Back on Earth, President Mara Lynn gathered her team. "They think the Spire is untouchable," she said. "Shielded by chronoton fields. Guarded by AI sentinels. Woven into space-time itself. But they forget one thing." "What's that?" asked Dr. Theo Vale. "They built it using protocols we helped design. Years ago, during early cooperation talks, Earth had offered minor improvements to the Council's communication standards. Small tweaks to data compression, error correction, signal routing. The Council had accepted them, thinking it harmless. What they didn't know was that every suggestion contained a seed, a tiny, dormant piece of logic that could one day wake up and rewrite the rules. Project Aegis had been waiting for this moment. Deep beneath the Pacific, the Aegis core pulsed with quiet energy. It was not a supercomputer. It was something else, a network of human minds linked through quantum resonance, guided by adaptive algorithms that learned faster than any AI. It did not think like a machine. It thought like a strategist, a poet, a general, and a teacher all at once. The plan was simple: do nothing. No ships would be sent. No weapons fired. Earth would reach across light years not with force but with patience. For 72 hours, the Nexus Spire functioned normally. Council officials came and went. Data flowed in and out. Security scans showed no anomalies. The Spire's AI sentinels patrolled its corridors, their logic flawless. Then at exactly 00 Galactic Standard Time, everything changed, not with a bang, but with a blink. Every system aboard the Spire rebooted, not into chaos but into a perfect simulation. Lights stayed on. Gravity held. Alarms remained silent. To the crew, nothing seemed wrong. They sent messages, received replies, monitored fleets, made decisions, but none of it was real. Earth had not hacked the Spire. It had replaced its reality. Using the dormant logic seeds embedded in the communication protocols, Project Aegis had woven a mirror world, a flawless echo of the Spire's normal operations. Every command the crew sent was accepted, processed, and fed back to them as success. In truth, the Spire drifted, powerless, its real output severed from the galaxy. The Council only realized the truth when their own backup systems tried to contact the Spire, and got no response. Not silence. Not failure, just nothing. Panic erupted in the conclave. How is this possible? The presiding arbiter demanded, its obsidian face cracking with stress. Vera, the Elythian overseer, stood beside Elias, her form trembling like disturbed water. They didn't break in, she said softly. They were already inside. They've been inside for decades. Elias said nothing. He didn't need to. On Earth, people watched the stars. Children played in parks. Farmers harvested crops under open skies. There was no celebration, no victory parade. Just quiet resolve. Dr. Theo Vale studied the data streams. The simulation will hold for 6 more hours, he told President Lin. Long enough for the council to understand. But what happens after? She asked. We offer to restore the spire. Freely. No conditions. Lin nodded. Let them see that our power isn't for control. It's for choice. As the truth spread, the galaxy watched in awe. Humanity had done the impossible. Not by destroying, but by outthinking. They had turned the Council's greatest strength, its unity, its systems, its trust in order, into its weakness. Species that had lived under the Council's shadow for centuries began to speak up. The small, the ignored, the voiceless, they saw in humanity a reflection of their own hopes. If Earth could stand against the giants and win without violence, maybe they could too. In the conclave, the Karathi delegation finally broke their silence. Their leader, a grizzled warlord named Torvak, stepped forward. We were wrong, he said, his voice rough but honest. We thought strength was fire and steel. You showed us it is silence and mind. Elias looked at him. Strength is knowing when not to use it. The presiding arbiter, humbled, announced the verdict. The quarantine was lifted. Earth was granted full membership in the Galactic Council, with equal voice and the right to veto any decision that threatened its sovereignty. But even as the chamber erupted in cautious applause, a new alert flashed on Earth's deep space monitors. Far beyond the Council's borders, in the lawless void known as the Outer Rim, a new fleet was gathering. Not 500 ships, 10,000. Led by warlords who had watched Earth's display not with respect, but with hunger. They saw not a peaceful people, but a prize. They think we're weak because we showed mercy, Theo said, staring at the star map. No, Lin replied. They think we're alone, but Earth was not alone anymore. Across the galaxy, small species began sending quiet messages, offers of alliance, of data, of support. They had seen what humanity could do, and they wanted to stand with them. In the conclave, Elias prepared to return home. As he walked through the chamber, alien delegates stepped aside, not in fear but in respect. Vera stopped him one last time. What will you do now? She asked. Elias looked toward Sol, toward home. We'll keep listening, and when the time comes, we'll speak again. The galaxy had learned that Earth stayed quiet not because it had nothing to say, but because it was waiting for the right moment to be heard, and that moment was just beginning. The victory was real, but peace was not. News of Earth's triumph over the Nexus Spire had spread like light through the void, but not all who heard it were impressed. In the lawless stretches beyond the Council's reach, the outer concord stirred. Made of exiled warlords, rogue fleets, and scavenger clans who lived by raid and ruin, they saw Earth not as a peer, but as prey. Their leader, a scarred warlord named Drexmal, stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Iron Maw. Around him, 10,000 ships gathered, patchwork hulls welded from stolen tech fueled by desperation and greed. They had watched the Karathi humbled without a single shot fired. To them, that wasn't strength. It was weakness wrapped in clever tricks. If they won't fight, Drex growled to his captains, then they won't survive. The fleet moved as one, a black tide surging toward Sol. They didn't ask for surrender. They didn't send warnings. They came to take on Earth. The warning came not from spies or scouts, but from the silence itself. Project Aegis noticed the change first. Subtle shifts in deep space radiation, faint echoes of engine signatures where none should be. Within minutes, the full picture formed. A force larger than any the Council had ever fielded was heading straight for the inner system. President Mara Lin called an emergency session. They think we're soft because we showed mercy to the Karathi, she said. They don't understand. Mercy was a choice. Defense is a promise. Dr. Theo Vale studied the incoming data. They're using old Council war tactics. Brute force, overwhelming numbers, terror strikes on civilian centers. They expect us to panic, to beg, to break. Elias Rourke, back on Earth for the first time in months, stood by the window of the Synod chamber, watching the sunrise over Geneva. Then we'll give them something they can't predict, he said. Earth did not build a wall. It built a maze. Project Aegis activated its final phase. Not weapons, scenarios. Every satellite, every drone, every piece of orbital debris became part of a living strategy. Asteroids were nudged from the belt with gentle thrusters, placed in precise orbits. Solar observatories focused beams not to burn but to blind sensors. Old comms relays broadcast false distress calls in a dozen alien languages, luring enemy scouts into empty zones. The Outer Concord entered the Sol system expecting a quick victory. Instead, they found confusion. Their long-range scans showed fleets where none existed, ghost armadas flickering in and out of sensor range. Navigation systems glitched, pointing ships toward empty space or into each other's paths. Communications filled with static, then whispers in their own tongues, saying things like retreat or trap ahead. Drexmal roared in fury. Ignore it. Push forward. Earth is right there. But Earth was not just a planet. It was a mind. As the Concorde fleet neared Mars, the real trap began. Asteroids, moved days in advance, drifted into their path. Not to collide, but to bend gravity. The fleet's formation stretched, then snapped. Ships lost sync. Command signals failed. Then came the solar flares. Earth's observatories had been watching the sun for decades. They knew its moods, its cycles, its hidden storms. At the perfect moment, they triggered a controlled magnetic pulse. A flare aimed not at destruction, but disruption. It washed over the Concorde fleet like an invisible wave. Every unshielded system flickered and died. Life support stuttered. Weapon locks failed. Engines sputtered. The fleet, once a roaring beast, became a school of blind fish in a storm. But Earth did not strike. Instead, rescue drones, small, unarmed, painted white, drifted among the disabled ships. They broadcast a simple message in every known language. You are not under attack. Power down. Await instructions. Some Concorde captains fired on the drones. Their shots missed, deflected by microgravitational fields generated by hidden satellites. Others, exhausted and confused, obeyed. One by one, ships went dark. Not destroyed, but disarmed. On the Iron Maw, Drexmal pounded his console. This is not war. This is humiliation. His first officer, a weary veteran named Kira, looked at the screens. No, sir. This is something worse. They're showing us we never stood a chance. Back on Earth, Elias watched the feeds. We're not trying to win a battle, he told President Lin. We're trying to end a cycle. The Outer Concord had spent lifetimes believing power meant domination. Earth was teaching them that true power meant control, not just over others, but over oneself. By the time the last Concorde ship powered down, not a single human weapon had fired. Not a single life had been lost. Then came the offer. Earth opened channels to every disabled vessel. You are stranded, the message said. But you do not have to be enemies. We offer repair, food, and safe passage if you choose peace. Some refused. They tried to reboot weapons to flee, but Aegis gently locked their systems again, not with force but with logic they could not override. Others accepted. Kira was the first captain to step onto a human transport. She expected cages, interrogations, punishment. Instead, she was given water, a warm meal, and a seat at a table with Earth officers who asked about her home, her family, her reasons for joining the Concorde. She wept. Word spread through the disabled fleet. Earth was not what they'd been told. In the days that followed, Earth engineers worked alongside former enemies, repairing ships not for war but for travel. Old warships were stripped of weapons and refitted as colony transports, medical carriers, even schools. The galaxy watched in stunned silence. In the Grand Conclave, even the Karathi delegation stood in awe. You turned an invasion into an invitation, Torvak said when Elias returned. Elias shook his head. We just gave them a choice they never had before. Dr. Theo Vale, studying the data, made a discovery. The Outer Concord hadn't formed out of pure evil. Many of its members came from worlds crushed by the Council's neglect, planets ignored, resources stolen, voices silenced. They had turned to violence because no one had ever offered them another way. Now Earth had. President Lin made a bold move. She released the blueprints for Earth's defensive systems. Not the weapons, but the early warning networks, the asteroid mapping tools, the solar monitoring arrays. She sent them to every minor species, every forgotten colony, every world that had lived in fear. Protect yourselves, the message read, not to fight, but to never be helpless again. The Council was furious. The Thalassari warned of chaos. The Veln Collective feared imbalance, but the small species, they cheered for the first time in centuries. The balance of power began to shift, not toward war, but toward dignity, and through it all, Earth stayed quiet, not because it had nothing to say, but because its actions were speaking louder than words ever could. The galaxy held its breath. Earth had not fired a single weapon, yet it had stopped an invasion of 10,000 ships. It had turned enemies into guests, war machines into homes, and silence into strength. Now the Grand Conclave prepared for something it had never done before. Welcome humanity not as a petitioner, but as an equal. The new assembly hall was different from the old conclave. Lighter, open, built with input from dozens of species, including humans. Sunlight, real sunlight filtered through crystal panels, fell on the central floor where Elias Rourke now stood. Around him sat not just the old powers, but representatives from worlds that had never been allowed a voice. Desert moon nomads, ocean dwellers from ice-covered planets, even former raiders from the outer conquered. The presiding arbiter, humbled but resolute, rose. The age of enforced silence is over, it announced. From this day, no species shall be judged by its past, but by its choices. Elias stepped forward. He wore no uniform, just simple clothes from Earth. Dark trousers, a gray shirt, no medals. He looked not like a conqueror, but like a teacher. You judged us by your rules, he said, his voice calm but carrying to every corner of the hall. You thought silence meant fear. You thought patience meant weakness. But we stayed quiet not because we had nothing to say, but because we were waiting for you to listen. He paused. The hall was utterly still. Strength isn't measured in firepower, he continued. It's measured in choice. The choice to show mercy when you could destroy. The choice to offer help when you could punish. The choice to build instead of burn. Then he turned to the delegates. Earth does not seek to rule. We seek to share. Our knowledge, our mistakes, our hope. As he spoke, ships were already leaving Sol space, not warships but explorers. Vessels built not for conquest but for connection. They carried scientists, teachers, engineers, and open-source archives of human history, not just wars and weapons, but art, music, medicine, and the long, hard road from division to unity. Back on Earth, life returned to normal, but a new kind of normal. Children learned alien languages in school. Farmers traded seeds with Martian botanists. In orbit, former conquered ships, now painted in bright colors, ferried supplies to new outposts where humans and ex-raiders built settlements together. Dr. Theo Vale stood on a balcony in Nairobi, watching a cargo shuttle lift off toward the stars. Beside him, Kira, the former conquered officer, sipped tea. I thought the galaxy was a place of claws and teeth, she said. You showed me it could have hands. And hearts, Theo smiled. We're all learning. But peace was not the end. It was the beginning. Deep in space, beyond even the outer rim, strange signals had begun to appear. Not hostile, not friendly. Just watching. Ancient probes, older than the Council itself, had stirred in the void. Some believed they belonged to the first builders, the mythical species that seeded life across the galaxy. Others feared they were guardians, awakened by the shift in power. Earth did not panic. It listened. Project Aegis, now open source and shared with trusted allies, began analyzing the signals, not to weaponize them, but to understand. Humanity had learned its lesson. Knowledge used wisely was the greatest shield of all. In Geneva, President Lin met with leaders from a dozen new alliance worlds. They spoke of trade, of shared defense, of protecting the weak. But more than that, they spoke of trust. We used to think power meant standing above others, said a Thalassari elder. Now we see it means standing beside them. On Mars, the last of the Karathi cruisers was finally repaired, not as a warship, but as a university. Its hull bore a new name, the Quiet Dawn, and in the assembly hall, Elias finished his speech. We do not ask for thanks, he said. We ask for partnership. The galaxy is vast, and no one should have to face it alone. As he stepped down, species that once saw humans as oddities now offered hands, tentacles, or light pulses of greeting. Even Vera, the Elythian overseer, shimmered with something close to pride. "You did not break the galaxy," she whispered into his mind. "You healed it." That night Earth glowed under a clear sky. Cities hummed with life. Satellites circled silently above, no longer weapons but watchful friends. In shipyards near the moon, new vessels took shape. Sleek, fast, built for exploration, not war. Their names were simple: Horizon, Promise, Tomorrow. Humanity had been tested, not by fire but by silence, and in that silence it had found its voice. The galaxy had pushed too far, and Earth, quiet no longer, had answered, not with rage, but with reason. Not with force, but with faith. Now the stars waited, and humanity, finally free, reached out, not to conquer, but to connect. The quiet roar was over. The conversation had just begun.